The porch light cast long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn of 1352 Oakwood Drive. Inside, a 68-year-old man prepared his morning coffee, unaware that 23 police vehicles had silently surrounded his suburban Fresno home. At precisely 6:17 a.m. on March 4, 2020, Detective Maria Santos gave the signal. Police search warrant. The door splintered open as tactical officers rushed in. The coffee mug shattered against the kitchen floor. Ronald Miller, you were under arrest for the 1979 murder of Rachel Brown. The elderly man's neighbors watched in stunned disbelief as officers led away someone they'd known for decades. A little league coach, a church deacon, a grandfather. None could fathom the secret he'd kept buried for 41 years. October 17, 1979. A crisp autumn evening in rural Fresno County. 17-year-old Rachel Brown wiped down the counters at Miller's Diner after her shift, eager to meet friends at the Harvest Festival. The neon open sign buzzed overhead as she waved goodbye to her manager. "See you tomorrow, Mr. Jenkins." Security footage, grainy and imperfect, captured her final known moments. Rachel, dark hair pulled into a ponytail, walked beneath the yellow parking lot lights toward her blue Chevy Nova. She fumbled with her keys, glanced over her shoulder at something off camera, then paused. A shadow moved across the edge of the frame, and Rachel Brown vanished into thin air. For 41 years her disappearance tortured her family and baffled investigators. No body, no weapon, no witnesses, just an abandoned car with the driver's door ajar, keys dangling from the ignition. The case went cold despite desperate pleas from parents who aged into their graves without answers. A generation passed, technology evolved, and finally a DNA sample preserved since 1979 spoke the truth that had been silently waiting all along. The revelation of who killed Rachel Brown and his shocking connection to the community will leave you speechless. Before we dive deeper into this haunting case that defied solution for over 4 decades, hit that subscribe button if unsolved mysteries fascinate you. This story exposes how evil can hide behind the most ordinary faces, sometimes for a lifetime. Rachel Elizabeth Brown wasn't just another statistic in a cold case file. Born July 3, 1962, she was the middle child of Thomas and Margaret Brown, a spirited teenager with auburn hair that caught fire in the sunlight, as her mother would later tell reporters. Her senior yearbook photo from Westridge High showed a confident young woman with bright eyes and a half-smile that suggested she knew something you didn't. She was magnetic, recalled Diane Foster, Rachel's best friend since 3rd grade. Not just pretty, but alive in a way that made everyone want to be around her. She had plans, big ones. Those plans included studying journalism at UC Berkeley. Rachel had already been accepted on early admission, the first in her family destined for college. Her bedroom walls featured newspaper clippings of Watergate reporters, Woodward and Bernstein, alongside posters of Fleetwood Mac and Led Zeppelin. The dualities of Rachel, serious student journalist for the school paper by day, carefree teenager who loved dancing to Heart of Glass by night. She wanted to expose corruption, her father told investigators in 1979, said she'd win a Pulitzer someday. His voice cracked during recorded interviews when he added, "I believed her." Rachel worked part-time at Miller's Diner to save for college, refusing her parents' offer to fund her education entirely. "I need to earn my way," she'd insisted. Independence mattered to her. Fresno County in 1979 existed in a curious limbo between rural agricultural community and growing urban center. The vast Central Valley stretched out like an endless patchwork quilt of farmland. Cotton, tomatoes, and vineyards that supplied half the nation's produce. Pickup trucks outnumbered sedans 3-1. CB radios crackled with trucker conversations along Highway 99, the main artery connecting the region to Los Angeles and Sacramento. This was Pret. No cell phones, no internet. A place where neighbors still brought castles when someone fell ill. And church potlucks served as the primary social hub. The nearest shopping mall had opened just 2 years earlier, and teenagers like Rachel treated trips there as pilgrimages to civilization. "We were sheltered compared to San Francisco or LA," said former classmate Michael Denton. But things were changing. The big drought had hit in 76 and 77. Farmers were struggling. There was tension beneath the friendly small-town surface. The recession had taken its toll. Gas prices soared following the Iranian Revolution earlier that year. Lines at fuel stations stretched for blocks. President Carter had delivered his infamous Malaise speech just 3 months before Rachel disappeared, and many locals had nodded in grim agreement with his assessment of America's crisis of confidence. Miller's Diner sat at the crossroads of State Route 41 and Madera Avenue, a chrome-trimmed building with red vinyl booths and waitresses in pale yellow uniforms. It served as a landmark in a community where people gave directions using phrases like "turn left at the Johnson farm" rather than street names. The night Rachel vanished, temperatures had dipped into the low 50s, cold by Central Valley standards. The annual Harvest Festival was in full swing downtown. Strands of lights illuminating streets usually dark by 8 p.m. Most businesses closed early so folks could attend. Miller's Diner was one of the few establishments still open, catching travelers passing through and locals grabbing coffee after the festival. Where are you watching from right now? Ever visited California's Central Valley? If you had been in Fresno County that October night in 1979, you might have seen Rachel serving coffee in that yellow uniform, unaware that in less than 2 hours she would become the subject of one of California's most baffling disappearances. And the person responsible might have been sitting in one of those red vinyl booths, watching her every move. October 1979 began with promise for Rachel Brown. Her college application essay had earned praise from her English teacher. Her savings account had just crossed the $1,000 threshold, and she'd been promoted to shift supervisor at Miller's Diner, a vote of confidence from owner Frank Jenkins that came with a 50 hourly raise. She called me on October 2nd ecstatic about that raise. Diane Foster later testified, said she'd be able to buy that used typewriter she wanted before Christmas. The timeline of Rachel's final days reveals nothing outwardly alarming. On October 10th, she attended a college financial aid workshop at her high school. October 12th, she babysat for the Wilsons down the street. October 14th, Sunday church, followed by homework at the public library, each day documented in her planner with neat, deliberate handwriting. Miller's Diner wasn't just Rachel's workplace. It was a community institution, situated where interstate travelers and locals intersected. The diner served as an unofficial town hall. Farmers discussed crop prices over breakfast. High schoolers claimed corner booths after football games. Highway patrol officers knew each waitress by name. That diner was the pulse of the community, explained Sheriff Daniel Blackwood in a 1980 interview. Everyone passed through those doors, eventually made it the perfect hunting ground. The layout became critical to the investigation. L-shaped counter with stools bolted to the floor, 12 booths along the windows, kitchen with swing doors. Staff entrance leading to the back parking lot, separate from the customer lot, where employees parked their vehicles beneath 2 humming floodlights. Wednesday, October 17th. Rachel's shift began at 3:30 p.m. The diner was unusually busy for midweek, hosting an impromptu gathering of agricultural commissioners discussing water rights. Waitress Pamela Howell remembered Rachel seemed distracted. She kept checking her watch, had plans to meet her boyfriend Tyler at the festival after work. At 7:14 p.m., Rachel served table 9, a middle-aged couple passing through from Oregon. At 7:32 p.m., she rang up a takeout order for Mrs. Abernathy, a regular who ordered the same meatloaf dinner every Wednesday. At 8:05 p.m., she took a 10-minute break, using the payphone outside to call her mother. She told me not to wait up, Margaret Brown recalled. Said she'd be home by midnight at the latest. I told her to have fun at the festival. At 9:17 p.m., Rachel counted her tips 22.40 and clocked out. Security footage from the diner's newly installed system captured her chatting with cook Roberto Vasquez near the dishwashing station. Their conversation appeared animated, with Rachel laughing and gesturing with her hands. "We were talking about movies," Vasquez told police. She was excited about seeing Alien at the drive-in that weekend. Nothing seemed wrong. The most scrutinized 4 minutes of footage begin at 9:22 p.m. Rachel pushes through the back door, her purse slung over her shoulder. The camera angle shows a partial view of the employee parking lot. Her blue 1972 Chevy Nova is visible in the bottom right corner of the frame. Rachel walks confidently across the lot. She reaches her car at 9:23 p.m. As she fumbles with her keys, a shadow moves at the edge of the frame. Rachel turns. She appears to recognize whoever approaches. Her posture relaxes rather than tenses. No fear is evident in her body language. At 9:24 p.m., Rachel and the unidentified figure stand in conversation beside her car. The angle prevents facial identification of the second person, who remains mostly obscured. At 9:25 p.m., Rachel opens her car door. Then something off-camera catches her attention. She steps away from her vehicle, moving out of the camera's range. The unknown figure follows. Neither Rachel nor the figure reappears on camera. At 9:42 p.m., Tyler Martinez arrived at the diner looking for Rachel, concerned when she hadn't shown up at their festival meeting spot. He found her car with the driver's door open, keys in, the ignition, and her purse on the passenger seat, wallet and ID inside untouched. "I knew something was wrong immediately," Martinez stated. "Rachel would never leave her car like that. Never." The staff called police at 9:51 p.m. By 10:30 p.m., 6 patrol cars surrounded Miller's diner. By midnight, the first search parties formed. By dawn, Rachel's school photo appeared on missing person flyers across 3 counties, but Rachel Brown had vanished without a struggle, without a scream, without a trace, as though she had stepped out of one world and into another, leaving only questions hanging in the autumn air. In missing persons cases, investigators often cite the golden 48, the critical first 48 hours, when evidence remains fresh and memories unclouded. For Rachel Brown, those hours ticked away against a backdrop of growing desperation and dwindling hope. Hour 1, 10:30 p.m., 11:30 p.m., October 17th. Sheriff's deputies Morris and Kellerman secured the scene at Miller's diner. They roped off Rachel's Chevy Nova and the surrounding parking area with yellow crime scene tape. Inside the vehicle, Rachel's purse containing 4673, her driver's license, a tube of cherry lip gloss and a paperback copy of The Catcher in the Rye with a receipt bookmark showing page 89. No signs of struggle inside the vehicle. Deputy Morris noted in his initial report, keys in ignition, engine cold. The first roadblock went up at 11:15 p.m. at the junction of State Route 41 and Madera Avenue. Deputies questioned drivers. Had they seen a young woman matching Rachel's description? Had they noticed anything unusual near Miller's diner in the past 2 hours? Hours 2 to 6, 11:30 p. Measure 3:30 a.m., October 17th, 18. Detective Lawrence Powell arrived at midnight. A 20-year veteran with a reputation for thoroughness, Powell ordered an expansion of the search perimeter to include dumpsters, drainage ditches, and the wooded area behind the diner. "We're looking for anything. Clothing, a shoe, signs of disturbance," he told officers at the 1 a.m. briefing. By 2:30 a.m., officers had taken statements from all diner staff and the handful of customers present during Rachel's shift. Tyler Martinez, Rachel's boyfriend, underwent the first of 3 interrogations that night. "The boyfriend is always our first suspect," Powell would later explain to Rachel's parents. "We had to rule him out." Martinez provided a solid alibi. He'd been at the Harvest Festival with friends who confirmed his whereabouts. Security footage from the festival entrance showed him arriving at 8:40 p. nearly an hour before Rachel disappeared. Hours 7 to 24, 3:30 a.m., 9:30 p.m. October 18th, dawn brought 50 volunteers, teachers from Rachel's school, church members, neighbors, who formed search parties. They combed the 5M radius around Miller's Gay diner while officers conducted door-to-door canvassing along Madeira Avenue. At 10:01 a.m., the first press conference, Sheriff Blackwood kept it brief. 17-year-old female missing under suspicious circumstances were pursuing all leads. By noon, Rachel's photo appeared on local television. By 3:00 p.m., the Fresno Bee ran a front-page story. By 7:00 p.m., all 3 Sacramento stations had picked up the case. The evidence collection proceeded methodically, but faced significant limitations. In 1979, DNA analysis remained years away from criminal investigation applications. Officers collected fingerprints from Rachel's car, finding 43 distinct sets. Without modern automated fingerprint identification systems, each would require manual comparison against physical cards. We gathered cigarette butts, soda cans, even candy wrappers from the parking lot, recalled Officer Jenkins, but we had no way of knowing which might be connected to the perpetrator. Hours 25, 48, 9:30 p.m. October 18th, 9:30 p.m. October 19th. 3 suspects emerged during this period. Frank Jenkins, the diner owner, initially aroused suspicion when officers discovered he'd recently taken out a substantial life insurance policy on key employees, including Rachel. This suspicion dissolved when records confirmed the policy was standard business practice implemented months earlier for all staff. Roberto Vasquez, the cook who last spoke with Rachel, underwent 12 hours of questioning. His apartment was searched, yielding nothing suspicious. Polygraph results, rudimentary by modern standards, showed no significant deception indicators. Drifter Calvin Weathers became suspect number 3 after a gas station attendant reported a man matching his description, asking weird questions about the missing girl. Weathers was located at a motel 30 Mayarang South, but quickly cleared. He'd been in county lockup for public intoxication the night Rachel vanished. By hour 45, investigators had collected 17 witness statements, processed Rachel's vehicle, developed the security footage, and established a timeline of her final evening. What they lacked was any physical evidence suggesting what had happened after she stepped out of the camera's view. The public response intensified as hours passed without breaks. 200 residents attended a candlelight vigil on the courthouse steps. Rachel's classmates distributed 5,000 flyers across 3 counties. An anonymous donor offered a $10,000 reward for information. Local media coverage took a darker turn as the second day ended without progress. The Fresno Bee's Evening Edition headline read, "Sheriff fears foul play in teen's disappearance." The article quoted an unnamed source suggesting Rachel had likely been abducted and transported out of the area. The longer someone's missing, the less likely we find them alive, Sheriff Blackwood admitted in a CBS News interview that marked the case's jump to national attention. But we're not giving up hope. Someone knows something. If you're finding this case intriguing so far, tap that like button right now. Every like helps more people discover Rachel's story, and perhaps somewhere out there, someone with a missing puzzle piece will see it. As the 48-hour mark passed, the golden window closed. The investigation would continue, but the urgent momentum of those first critical hours gave way to something different. A methodical, grinding search for justice that would span decades. The Brown family never moved from their single-story home on Mulberry Street. Thomas and Margaret refused to change their phone number, even when prank calls plagued them in the early 1980s. Rachel's bedroom remained untouched, preserved like a museum exhibit of teenage life circa 1979. her college acceptance letter pinned to the bulletin board, her Christmas present still wrapped in the closet. "We can't leave," Margaret explained to a reporter on the 5th anniversary of Rachel's disappearance. "What if she finds her way back? And we're not here." Hope evolved into a peculiar form of torment. Every unidentified female body discovered within 500 miles prompted a call from authorities. Thomas Brown drove to morgues across 3 states over the years, steeling himself to identify remains that were never his daughter. The not knowing is worse than anything, he confessed during a 1986 interview. "Your mind creates 1,000 terrible scenarios, and you live through each one over and over." Rachel's younger sister, Sarah, grew up in the shadow of absence. At 18, she surpassed her sister's age at disappearance, crossing an invisible threshold that her parents marked with silent grief. Sarah later became a victim's advocate with the National Center for Missing Persons, channeling her family's pain into purpose. "My earliest memories are of my parents crying when they thought I was asleep," Sarah revealed in a 1999 documentary. "I learned to walk quietly around our house. We lived in whispers for years." The case officially went cold in 1982 when Detective Powell retired. The box of evidence, Rachel's hairbrush, the surveillance tape, fingerprint cards, witness statements, was relegated to the department's storage room. A new filing system in 1987 accidentally misfiled the case, where it remained lost until 1991. Periodic reviews occurred but generated no momentum. In 1985, investigators briefly pursued a connection to a similar disappearance in Bakersfield, but found no substantive links. In 1994, an anonymous tip suggesting Rachel's body was buried beneath a recently demolished barn led to a 3-day excavation that yielded nothing but animal bones. By 1999, the 20th anniversary of Rachel's disappearance, the case had been featured on 3 true crime television shows. Each broadcast generated dozens of tips, all dead ends. Thomas Brown suffered his first heart attack the following year, doctors attributing it partly to decades of unresolved stress. The Brown family marked somber milestones. Rachel would have been 30 in 1992, would have turned 40 in 2002. The birthdays she never celebrated, the wedding she never had, the career that existed only in possibility. Technology evolved while the case languished. Computers replaced typewriters in the sheriff's department. The internet transformed information sharing between agencies. Cell phones and surveillance cameras became ubiquitous. Developments that would have dramatically altered the investigation had Rachel disappeared 20 years later. In 2010, Rachel's mother, Margaret, passed away from breast cancer. Her final coherent words to the hospice nurse, "Tell Thomas to keep looking." He did, funding private investigators with his retirement savings and second mortgage, chasing fragments of hope across California. The calendar pages turned relentlessly. Miller's Diner closed in 1996, replaced by a gas station convenience store. Rachel's high school classmates had children who graduated from the same school. Fresno County transformed from rural farmland to suburban sprawl. What time is it where you're watching? Rachel disappeared at 9:25 p.m. on a Wednesday night. For her family, the clock seemed to stop at that precise moment, while for the rest of the world, time marched forward without mercy. By 2019, 40 years after Rachel vanished, most people in Fresno County had forgotten her name. The annual vigils had dwindled from hundreds to dozens, to just the Brown family and a few loyal friends. Local papers no longer covered the anniversary. The case file gathered dust, its physical evidence degrading with each passing year. And then, Detective Maria Santos pulled the box from storage, setting in motion a sequence of events that would shatter 4 decades of silence. Maria Santos wasn't supposed to be a homicide detective. The daughter of migrant farm workers, who had picked tomatoes in the same Fresno County fields where Rachel Brown once lived. Santos had initially pursued nursing at Fresno State. That trajectory changed during her sophomore year when her cousin Lucia vanished. After a night out with friends in 1998, the detective assigned to Lucia's case treated it like she'd just run away. Santos recalled in a 2018 interview, Hispanic girl, working-class family. They didn't put in the effort. 3 weeks later, hikers found her body in Kings Canyon. The case is still unsolved. Santos changed her major to criminal justice the next day, graduated with honors, entered the police academy at 23, made detective by 30, specialized in cold cases by 35. I became the cop I wished had been assigned to my cousin's case, she explained. By 2019, Detective Santos had developed a reputation within the department for what colleagues called her resurrection skills, the ability to breathe new life into forgotten cases. She'd solved 4 cold cases in 7 years, including the 1989 murder of a convenience store clerk that had been considered unsolvable. Her interest in Rachel Brown's disappearance began purely by chance. In December 2019, Santos was researching another cold case when she encountered a cross-reference to the Brown file in the department's digital archive. The coincidence struck her immediately. Rachel had vanished almost exactly 40 years earlier, at approximately the same age Lucia had been when she was killed. "I felt a connection I can't fully explain," Santos later told the Fresno Bee. "I kept thinking about Thomas Brown, still waiting for answers after 4 decades. I wanted to give him what my family never got, closure." Santos formally requested permission to reopen the case on January 6, 2020. Her timing proved fortunate. The department had recently received federal funding for cold case initiatives, and Sheriff Cameron Maxwell, himself a rookie deputy during the original Brown investigation, quickly approved her request. The contrast between 1979 investigative methods and 2020 capabilities became immediately apparent as Santos assembled her team. Where original investigators had relied on physical card files and landline phone calls, Santos deployed digital case management systems and social media outreach. The original detectives had worked with grainy black-and-white security footage. Santos used advanced enhancement software to clarify details invisible 40 years ago. The original investigators did their best with the tools they had, Santos emphasized. But comparing 1979 forensics to today is like comparing a horse-drawn carriage to a Ferrari. Santos's team sent evidence collected in 1979 for modern analysis. Partial fingerprints previously unusable yielded results when run through AFIS, Automated Fingerprint Identification System. Cell phone tower data, non-existent in 1979, helped establish movement patterns of persons of interest. Geographic profiling narrowed the likely radius where Rachel's remains might be found. Most crucially, Santos focused on 2 evidence items the original investigators had preserved, but couldn't fully utilize: a hair strand found in Rachel's car that didn't match her own, and a cigarette butt collected from the parking lot near where she was last seen. In 1979, these were just physical objects that might or might not be connected to the case, Santos explained. In 2020, they were potential DNA goldmines. Santos authorized genetic testing of both items, an expensive gamble given her limited budget. The hair yielded no usable DNA due to decades of improper storage, but the cigarette, sealed in an evidence bag and mostly protected from degradation, produced a partial DNA profile. This profile wasn't complete enough for a direct database match, but it contained enough markers for the newest investigative technique unavailable to the original detectives, genetic genealogy. "We're not just looking at criminal databases anymore," Santos explained during a department briefing. "We're looking at family trees, cousins, second cousins, distant relatives who've used commercial DNA testing. We can work backward to identify a suspect, even if they've never been arrested." The technique had famously identified the Golden State Killer in 2018. Now, Santos hoped it would lead her team to whoever had taken Rachel Brown on that October night in 1979. Before I reveal what the DNA results showed and the shocking identity of the person responsible for Rachel's disappearance, comment below with your theories on who the killer might be. Was it someone Rachel knew, a random predator, or someone hiding in plain sight all these years? Your insights might surprise you once you learn the truth. The small evidence box labeled Brown R in 1979 contained fragments of a vanished world. Polaroid photos with faded colors, witness statements typed on onion skin paper, a VHS transfer of the original security footage, and most crucially, a sealed evidence bag containing a Marlboro cigarette butt collected from the Miller's Diner parking lot. Preserved through 4 decades of technological revolution, evidence preservation in the pre-DNA era was inconsistent at best, explained Dr. Elena Vasquez, director of the California State Forensic Laboratory. Some departments inadvertently destroyed crucial biological evidence through improper storage. Others, through either foresight or fortunate accident, maintained samples in conditions that protected DNA from degradation. The Fresno County Sheriff's Department fell into the latter category. In 1982, evidence technician Walter Simmons had implemented a protocol requiring all biological samples to be stored in climate-controlled conditions, an unusual practice for the time. Walt was ahead of his curve. Detective Santos noted he'd read about this new thing called genetic fingerprinting in a science magazine and thought it might be important someday. He had no idea how right he was. The cigarette butt, originally collected because it appeared fresh and was found just 15 FT from Rachel's car, had been sealed in an evidence bag, then placed in a paper envelope, then stored in a temperature-controlled room for 40 years. This multi-layer protection prevented the extreme temperature fluctuations and humidity that typically destroy DNA samples. When Santos submitted the cigarette butt for testing in February 2020, laboratory technicians expressed cautious optimism. Modern extraction techniques could recover DNA from samples once considered hopeless. The cigarette paper had protected the dried saliva from complete degradation. "We're not looking for a complete DNA profile," Dr. Vasquez explained to Santos. "We need just enough markers to begin genetic genealogy work." Genetic genealogy, the technique that revolutionized cold case investigations, merges traditional DNA analysis with family tree research. The process begins with creating a DNA profile from crime scene evidence, then comparing it against public genetic databases where consumers have voluntarily uploaded their DNA results from ancestry services. "We're not looking for the suspect directly," explained Carla Montgomery, the genetic genealogist assigned to Rachel's case. "We're looking for relatives, fourth cousins, distant family branches, anyone sharing enough genetic markers to establish a relationship." When the lab results arrived on March 1, 2020, they exceeded expectations. The cigarette butt yielded a partial male DNA profile with 37 genetic markers intact, more than enough for Montgomery to begin her genetic detective work. She uploaded the profile to GED Match, a public database where users of services like 23andMe and Ancestry.com can voluntarily share their genetic information for research or to find relatives. The system identified 11 potential genetic matches, individuals sharing enough DNA with the cigarette sample to be distant relatives of the person who smoked it. These weren't close family members, Montgomery clarified. "We're talking about fourth and fifth cousins, people who might not even know they're related, but it's enough to start building family trees." Montgomery constructed sprawling genetic maps, 14 distinct family trees containing over 2,300 individuals spanning 6 generations. She traced lineages forward and backward, identifying marriage connections, following surname changes, documenting every birth and death. "It's like assembling a massive puzzle where most pieces are missing," she explained. "You build the framework first, then slowly fill in the blanks." The breakthrough came on March 3 at 11:42 p.m. After 16 straight hours of research, Montgomery identified a convergence point. 3 separate family trees intersected in a single individual, born in Fresno County in 1952. This person shared predicted genetic markers consistent with the DNA sample. "I'll never forget making that final connection," Montgomery recalled. "I actually gasped out loud because once I had the name, I Googled him immediately and there he was, still living in Fresno, less than 5 miles from where Rachel disappeared." Santos received the call just after midnight. By 2 a.m., she had pulled the identified suspect's driver's license record. By 3 a.m., she had his employment history. By dawn, she knew he had worked at Miller's Diner as a part-time maintenance man in 1979, a detail missing from the original investigation files because he'd been paid under the table. "The DNA match gave us probable cause," Santos explained. "But discovering his connection to the diner, that was the moment I knew we had Rachel's killer." "How's the weather where you are right now?" In Fresno that October in 1979, it was a cool autumn evening. Temperature in the low 50s, just cold enough for someone to want a cigarette to warm their hands while waiting in a parking lot. A cigarette that would lie dormant as evidence for 40 years before speaking its truth through the language of DNA. Within 24 hours of Montgomery's breakthrough, Detective Santos had secured a search warrant. Within 36 hours, surveillance teams positioned themselves around a suburban home on Oakwood Drive, and at precisely 6:17 a.m. on March 4, 2020, officers prepared to confront a killer who had been hiding in plain sight for more than 4 decades. The name that emerged from Carla Montgomery's genetic genealogy research stunned Detective Santos. Ronald Joseph Miller, born September 12, 1952. Current address, 1352 Oakwood Drive, Fresno. Occupation: recently retired high school guidance counselor. Marital status: widowed father of 2 adult children. Community standing: impeccable. "My first reaction was disbelief," Santos admitted later. "I thought there must be a mistake in the genealogical research. Miller had no criminal record, not even a parking ticket in 40 years. His personnel file from Westridge High School contained nothing but commendations and positive performance reviews. His Facebook page showed a smiling grandfather, surrounded by family at holiday gatherings and church functions." Santos ordered a deeper background investigation. Analysts combed through Miller's history, looking for connections to Rachel Brown or other potential victims. The results painted a disturbing picture of a man living a meticulously crafted double life. In 1979, 27-year-old Ronald Miller had worked multiple jobs: high school janitor during weekdays, part-time maintenance man at Miller's Diner on weekends, and occasional handyman for several local businesses. The diner connection had never appeared in the original investigation because owner Frank Jenkins paid Miller in cash for odd jobs. Jenkins died in 1994. Santos noted, "We found the connection through an old employee who remembered Ron, the fix-it guy, coming by on weekends to repair equipment." More disturbing was Miller's proximity to Rachel throughout her short life. As a school janitor, he had worked at Westridge High while Rachel attended classes there. Church records showed both families attended the same parish, though they were not directly acquainted. And most unsettlingly, Miller had been quietly promoted to guidance counselor in 1985 after earning a degree in educational psychology, giving him access to vulnerable teenagers for decades. "We now believe Rachel wasn't his first victim, just the first we know about," Santos revealed. His career choices consistently put him in proximity to potential victims. First as maintenance staff, then as an authority figure, students were encouraged to trust. The team constructed a detailed timeline of Miller's movements in October 1979. Employment records confirmed he performed maintenance at the diner the weekend before Rachel disappeared. A photo from the local newspaper's coverage of the 1979 Harvest Festival showed him in the background of a crowd shot. Evidence. He attended the event the night Rachel vanished. With the DNA match and circumstantial connections established, Santos needed contemporary evidence to strengthen the case. On March 2, 2020, she deployed a surveillance team to monitor Miller's daily routine. "We needed his DNA to confirm the ancestral match," Santos explained, "and we needed to verify he wasn't planning to flee." For 48 hours, officers in unmarked vehicles tracked Miller's movements. They photographed him shopping at Safeway, attending a Rotary Club meeting, and playing with his grandchildren at a local park. When Miller discarded a coffee cup at a cafe, an undercover officer retrieved it from the trash, providing a fresh DNA sample that confirmed the genetic genealogy results with near certainty. The coffee cup DNA matched both the cigarette butt and the hair strand from Rachel's car. The lab report concluded statistical probability of a false match, less than 1 in 1.2 trillion. With DNA confirmation secured, Santos obtained search warrants for Miller's home, vehicles, electronic devices, and a storage unit he maintained on the outskirts of town. The pre-dawn raid would need to be executed with precision, not just to gather evidence, but to prevent any possibility of Miller destroying potential evidence of other crimes. "We suspected he kept trophies," Santos said. "Most predators of this type do." The most shocking revelation came during background research into Miller's property history. The home on Oakwood Drive, where he now lived, had been purchased in 1983, but from 1977 to 1983, Miller had rented a small house on Madeira Avenue, directly behind Miller's diner, with a backlot that bordered the employee parking area where Rachel had vanished. He had a direct sightline to the employee entrance. Santos explained he could watch the waitresses come and go, select his target, plan, and because he occasionally did maintenance work there, his presence wouldn't raise suspicion. As dawn approached on March 4th, Santos briefed the tactical team. 23 officers took positions surrounding Miller's suburban home. The neighborhood slept peacefully, unaware that the kindly retired guidance counselor, the man who had coached Little League, served as church deacon, and counseled thousands of students, was about to be revealed as the monster who had haunted Fresno County for more than 40 years. The tactical team breached Ronald Miller's home with military precision. Flashbang devices disoriented him as officers stormed through his front door, weapons drawn. Body camera footage captured Miller disheveled in flannel pajamas, dropping his coffee mug in shock. Within seconds, he was face down on his kitchen floor, handscuffed behind his back. "What is this? There must be some mistake," he stammered as officers secured him. Detective Santos entered last, deliberately making eye contact with the man whose DNA had matched evidence from 4 decades earlier. "Ronald Joseph Miller, you are under arrest for the abduction and murder of Rachel Brown on October 17, 1979. The color drained from Miller's face. After a moment of stunned silence, he whispered, "I want a lawyer." The search of Miller's home yielded the first physical confirmation. Behind a false wall in the basement, officers discovered a small lockbox containing items belonging to Rachel, her missing class ring, a Westridge High ID card, and a heart-shaped locket her parents had given her for her 16th birthday. But the investigation was just beginning. A thorough search of his home and storage unit revealed similar trophies from 5 additional victims, young women who had disappeared between 1976 and 1982 across Central California. Cases previously unconnected were suddenly linked by DNA evidence and items in Miller's possession. "We believe Rachel was his 3rd victim, not his 1st, Santos stated at a press conference 3 days later. Miller appears to have stopped killing abruptly in 1982, coinciding with his career change to guidance counselor. The community reacted with collective horror. Miller wasn't just a resident. He was a trusted figure who had shaped young lives for decades. Former students expressed disbelief. Church members wept openly during services. The high school where he'd counseled teenagers for 35 years brought in crisis therapists to help students and staff process the betrayal. "He wrote my college recommendation letter," said Jason Fernandez, a former student. "He came to my wedding." How do you reconcile that man with this monster? Miller's own family disintegrated under the revelation. His son and daughter released a statement expressing indescribable horror and grief for the victims and their families. His daughter-in-law revealed that Miller had often babysit his grandchildren, a thought that now filled the family with retroactive terror. "We're victims too," his son told reporters. "Everything we believed about our father was a lie." For Thomas Brown, now 81 and in failing health, the arrest brought complex emotions. During the first court appearance, he sat quietly in his wheelchair, watching the man who had stolen his daughter appear in an orange jumpsuit. "I've imagined this moment for 41 years, Thomas told Santos afterward, "but I never pictured him as someone so ordinary." Brown, now a prominent victims advocate, spoke publicly about the arrest's impact. "DNA doesn't just solve cases. It prevents future crimes," she said during a CNN interview. "If today's technology had existed in 1979, my sister might still be alive, and Miller's later victims would have been spared." Media coverage exploded beyond Fresno County. National news organizations descended on the courthouse. True crime podcasts produced special episodes. Documentary filmmakers requested interviews. The case became a symbol of how modern forensic techniques could bring justice regardless of how much time had passed. Perhaps most disturbing were the photographs recovered from Miller's digital devices. Thousands of surveillance photos of female students taken during his counseling career. While no evidence suggested he had physically harmed students, investigators documented a pattern of subtle psychological manipulation of vulnerable teenagers. He positioned himself as a protector while secretly preying on the community, Santos explained. The persona of caring counselor was his perfect cover. As Miller awaited trial, held without bail, the question echoed through Fresno. How had he hidden in plain sight for so long? The answer lay partly in his calculated construction of an unimpeachable public image, and partly in the limited forensic capabilities of the era when he committed his crimes. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who appreciates true crime stories. Every share helps more people understand how advances in forensic science are finally bringing justice to victims who have waited decades for answers. More importantly, it reminds us that time doesn't diminish the impact of violent crimes on families and communities. Ronald Miller's trial began 14 months after his arrest. Maria Santos. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence, DNA matches from multiple crime scenes, trophies recovered from his home, and detailed journals documenting his crimes. Miller, facing charges for 6 murders spanning 3 counties, accepted a plea deal rather than face a jury. On May 17, 2021, Miller stood before Judge Catherine Reeves. Thomas Brown, now 82, sat in his wheelchair in the front row, oxygen tank at his side. Their eyes met briefly across the courtroom. Predator and father connected by an act of violence 4 decades old. I sentence you to 6 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, Judge Reeves declared. Though no punishment can restore what you have taken from these families, Miller spoke only once during the proceedings, offering no apology or explanation, just a cold statement that the man who did those things doesn't exist anymore. He was transferred to California State Prison Corcoran, where he remains in isolated housing. The impact of Rachel's case extended far beyond Fresno County. The success of genetic genealogy in solving this decades-old murder accelerated adoption of the technique nationwide. Within 18 months of Miller's arrest, over 60 cold cases across 27 states were solved using similar methods. Congress passed the Rachel Brown Cold Case Act in 2022, providing funding for DNA analysis of evidence from pre-9/90 unsolved violent crimes. The legislation acknowledged that technological advances could now provide answers thought permanently lost to time. For Thomas Brown, the resolution brought complicated peace. 3 weeks after the sentencing, investigators recovered Rachel's remains from a remote location in the Sierra Nevada foothills, buried on property Miller's family had owned in 1979. "I can finally lay my daughter to rest beside her mother," Thomas said at the funeral, attended by hundreds of community members. He died peacefully in his sleep 4 months later, having fulfilled his promise to find answers. Sarah Brown continues her advocacy work, now leading a national organization connecting families of cold case victims with genetic genealogy resources. Rachel's high school established a journalism scholarship in her name, fulfilling the college dream she never had the chance to pursue. Detective Maria Santos received the California Medal of Merit, but insists the true recognition belongs to Rachel and the other victims. "They waited patiently for science to catch up to justice," she noted. "Our job was simply to listen when DNA finally spoke their names." In the end, Rachel's case reminds us that time is not an ally of those who commit violent acts, only a temporary shield that grows thinner with each scientific advancement. No matter how perfectly constructed the facade, no matter how respected the public persona, truth leaves evidence that waits to be found.